So, you're not just a strategist, he said finally, a new light of admiration in his eyes. You're a warrior. You've been fighting a battle I knew nothing about. Julian leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled under his chin. Marcus is playing to the crowd. He's trying to make this a personal drama, not a financial crime. He's trying to discredit us before we can even speak. The summons had come via a curt text message from Marcus Thorne, her husband of a decade, my study, now. The brusque demand was typical of him, a man who saw no need for pleasantries in a life measured by bottom lines and power plays. Clara adjusted the cuff of her simple silk blouse. She felt a profound calm, a stillness that had been building for years beneath the surface of her placid existence. She knew what this meeting was about. It was the final act of a performance she had endured for too long. We stick to the plan, Clara said, her voice firm. We don't get sidetracked by his lies. We don't try to defend my character. We present the evidence, the numbers, the truth. The facts speak for themselves. She pushed open the heavy mahogany door to his study. The room was just as she remembered it, a fortress of wealth and cold intellect. Books lined the walls, but they were pristine, their spines unbroken. They were for show, a backdrop for a man who believed knowledge was a tool to be wielded, not a world to be explored. Marcus sat behind a vast, dark wood desk, the city skyline a glittering, distant backdrop through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He did not look up immediately. He was studying a spreadsheet on his tablet, his expression one of detached focus, as if the matters of his business were the only ones that held true importance. Julian looked at her, truly seeing her strength. He saw a woman who had been dragged through the mud and had emerged with her dignity intact. He saw a strategist who knew the most powerful weapon was not a loud accusation, but an irrefutable fact. Clara stood by the door, a figure in a world of his making. She had once tried to fill this house with warmth, with life, with a presence that was hers. But his coldness had always been an impenetrable barrier. He finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over her with a clinical indifference that felt more cutting than any angry word. There was no affection, no pity, only a calculation in his eyes, as if he were evaluating a failed investment. You're right, he said, a renewed sense of purpose in his voice. We don't stoop to his level. We rise above it. We'll hold the press conference as planned, and you will be the one to present the evidence. Take a seat, Clara, he said, his voice as smooth and unyielding as the expensive leather of his chair. He gestured to a chair opposite him, but Clara remained standing. It was a small act of rebellion, a silent assertion that she was no longer a piece of furniture to be placed as he saw fit. A flicker of surprise crossed Clara's face. Me, Julian. I'm the target of his smear campaign. It would be better if you presented it. I prefer to stand, Marcus, she replied, her voice steady. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times. Not the words, but the emotional fortitude required to face the inevitable. He shook his head. No. The public needs to see you. They need to see the woman he called a useless asset and see the truth for themselves. They need to see that you are not broken, that you are brilliant, and that your strength comes from within. It is the only way to expose the hollowness of his lies. He gave a dry, humorless smile. Always so stubborn. It's one of your least useful qualities. He set the tablet down and folded his hands on the desk. Let's not waste time. We both know why you are here. This marriage is over. Clara looked at him. And in that moment, she understood. He was not just giving her a chance to prove herself. He was giving her a chance to reclaim her narrative, to stand tall and face the man who had tried to erase her. He was giving her a platform to tell her own story, not the one Marcus had manufactured for her. A shard of pain, sharp and brief, pierced through her practiced calm. It was not a surprise, but the bluntness of his statement still held a certain sting. She had given 10 years of her life to this man, to this house, to a silent, unfulfilled promise. She had held on to hope, even in the darkest moments, that something would change, that he would see her not just as a means to an end, but as a person. I'll do it, she said, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. The fear was there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was dwarfed by the fire of her determination. She would not be dismissed. She would not be silenced. She would face the storm, and she would win. I understand, she said simply. The words hung in the air, a final surrender. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was transformed into a media circus. Klieg lights glared down from the ceiling, their hot, white glow making the air thick and oppressive. A sea of reporters, their faces a mixture of hungry anticipation and aggressive skepticism, jostled for position, their cameras and microphones aimed at the podium. This was it, the moment of truth. Julian Thorne had called an emergency press conference, and the rumor mill had been in overdrive for hours. This was not just a business announcement, it was a showdown. He seemed taken aback by her lack of protest. He had expected tears, begging, a desperate clinging to the life of luxury. His disdain for her grew even clearer. He saw her composure as weakness, a lack of fight. He was wrong. It was the opposite. It was a silence born of an unshakable inner strength. At the front, Julian stood with a quiet dignity, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos. By his side, Clara stood tall and serene, a figure of profound calm amidst the storm. She wore a simple, elegant business suit, her posture ramrod straight. She looked every bit the powerful professional, a stark contrast to the tabloid images that had been splashed across headlines for days. The desperate ex-wife. The socialite cast aside, Marcus Thorne was not present in person, but his influence was a tangible presence, a phantom weight in the room. His allies in the media were already preparing their questions, sharp and pointed, ready to cut down her credibility before she could even speak. "You understand," he repeated, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Good. It saves us a lot of trouble. The board is growing impatient. I need a successor, a true heir. And you, after 10 years, have failed to fulfill the only purpose for which you were brought into this family. You are infertile, a useless asset." Julian stepped up to the microphone first. His voice, calm and measured, cut through the din. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As you know, Phoenix Strategies has successfully bid to acquire Nexus Innovations. We are here today not just to discuss the future of Nexus, but to address some very serious allegations that have been circulating. Allegations that a person, a very skilled and dedicated person, on my team is somehow compromised by a personal vendetta." The words "useless asset" landed like a physical blow. He did not see her as a woman, as a partner, or even as a failure. He saw her as an item on a balance sheet, a line item to be written off. For 10 years, she had been a perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed fixture on his arm. The wife who knew when to speak and when to remain silent. But her inability to produce an heir had rendered her obsolete. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before he turned to Clara. "The woman they speak of is Clara Thorne. She is a brilliant analyst and an invaluable member of my team. She has led the forensic audit of Nexus, and the findings she has uncovered are not a matter of personal vendetta. They are a matter of public record, and they are irrefutable. I am not going to let a calculated smear campaign distract us from the truth. The truth is what we are here to present today. I went to the doctors, Marcus. You know I did. They said there was nothing wrong with me. They said the issue could have been with you as well," she stated, the accusation hanging unspoken in the air. He gestured to the side, and a large screen behind the podium came to life. "I will now turn the floor over to Clara Thorne to present her findings." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Nonsense. My family has never had such a problem. Do not dare to make baseless accusations. The fact is, the result is the same. No child, no successor. You are a liability I can no longer afford to carry." He slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. "The divorce papers. My lawyers have drafted them. It's a generous settlement, more than you deserve. Enough to live a very comfortable life. All you have to do is sign and never speak of this marriage again." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not what they had expected. They had expected Julian to defend his firm, to dismiss the rumors. They had not expected him to put the person at the center of the scandal on the front line. It was a bold move, a gamble. A few of the more cynical reporters smirked, their pens poised to write the first draft of her public humiliation. The papers looked like a tombstone for her life, a final, concrete symbol of his contempt. She saw the amount listed, a figure that could buy a small country. He thought money could buy her silence, her dignity, her history. He was offering her a golden cage, slightly larger than the one she was already in, to keep her from ever becoming a problem. Clara took a deep breath. She felt the weight of every eye on her. the silent judgment of a world that had dismissed her once before. She walked to the microphone, her heart pounding a rhythm of defiance against her ribs. She was not the desperate woman they thought her to be. She was a woman with a story to tell, not with words of bitterness, but with facts of truth. Clara's gaze remained fixed on the documents, but her mind was elsewhere. It was racing back over the past decade. He thought she had simply been a domestic figure, a woman whose world revolved around interior decoration and charity galas. He did not know about the late nights she spent in the library, not reading his pristine books, but poring over old financial magazines and business journals. He did not know about the times she had quietly listened to his phone calls, piecing together the convoluted deals and backroom handshakes that made up his business empire. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and strong, without a single tremor. "Over the past several weeks, my team and I have conducted a comprehensive audit of Nexus Innovations. My findings will show that the company's poor performance was not due to a downturn in the market, but to a series of deliberate, fraudulent actions by its leadership. For 10 years, she had been his silent shadow, but also his most astute observer. While he had been too arrogant to notice, she had been learning. She had analyzed his market trends, identified his weak points, and mentally cataloged his many questionable dealings. Her mind was a fortress of information, a secret vault of knowledge he had never once considered she might possess. He had dismissed her as a fool, a doll, a non-entity, his biggest mistake. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her displayed the first chart. It was a clean, easy-to-read graph showing a sharp decline in revenue that did not align with a similar decline in the industry. It was the first nail in the coffin of Marcus's narrative. "I won't be needing your money, Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a low, confident tone that made him pause. The calm certainty in her eyes was something he had never seen before. "The public narrative," she continued, her voice even, "is that Nexus was a failing enterprise. The data, however, tells a different story. It reveals a pattern of financial misdirection. For example, a series of payments totaling over $30 million were funneled through 3 shell companies: Greenwood Investments, Sterling Capital, and Horizon Ventures. All 3 of these companies were registered to the same PNXOBO box in a foreign jurisdiction known for its lax financial laws." He frowned, his sense of control momentarily slipping. "What? Don't be foolish. It's more than you could ever make on your own." She clicked again, and the screen showed a complex but comprehensible flowchart. It detailed the money trail, from Nexus Innovations to the shell companies, and then a final damning line that led directly to a personal bank account. The account number was visible, and it belonged to Marcus Thorne. "Perhaps," she replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "But I will build my own wealth, with my own hands, my own mind. I don't want a single penny of your ill-gotten fortune." It would be a constant reminder of the last 10 years. A collective gasp went through the room. The reporters, who had been ready to ask questions about her marital status and revenge, were now scribbling frantically, their faces pale with the shock of a genuine scandal. She had not come to plead her case. She had come with a mountain of irrefutable evidence. The insult, so subtly delivered, was far more effective than a scream. It struck at the very core of his identity. He had built his life on money and power, and she was rejecting both. A flash of genuine anger crossed his face, but he quickly suppressed it, replacing it with his usual mask of cold indifference. He simply could not comprehend her. She was not behaving like a woman who had just been cast out. She was behaving like a woman who had just been set free. A reporter from the front row, clearly a friendly contact of Marcus, stood up, his face flushed. "Ms. Thorne, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof that your ex-husband is behind this? Isn't this just a desperate act of revenge from a woman who was cast aside? Suit yourself," he sneered, a final act of condescension. "You'll be on the street in a month, but don't come back begging." Clara looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. "Sir, I have just shown you the proof. It is in the public record. The bank account, the shell companies, the dates of the transactions. It is all here. Revenge is a powerful motive, but it is not what you see here. What you see is justice. You see a crime being exposed. What you see is the culmination of 10 years of a man underestimating a woman's intelligence because he believed her only role was to be a wife. I will not, she promised. The words were a vow, a pact with herself. She paused, and the room was so silent you could hear the clicking of the cameras. He told me, as he was forcing me to leave the house, that I was a useless asset. He said I was nothing without him. He was wrong. The only useless asset was his own greed, which blinded him to the truth and led him to destroy his own company and his reputation. The silence of the sprawling mansion was a polished, suffocating thing. It clung to the marble floors and the cold walls, filling the space where conversation had long since ceased. For 10 years, Clara had moved through these opulent rooms, a silent observer in a gilded cage. Now, the cage door was about to be flung open, not for her freedom, but for her dismissal. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. The silence was broken by a flurry of activity as reporters began to type furiously, their narratives shifting in real time from personal drama to corporate crime. She turned and left the study, closing the door behind her with a soft click that resonated with finality. She did not stop to look at the family portraits on the walls, the pictures of a marriage that had been nothing more than a business arrangement. She walked past the servants who watched her with a mixture of pity and surprise. Their pity felt like a cheap insult. She did not need it. She felt a lightness, a sense of liberation she had not experienced in a decade. Julian stood by her side, a hand on her back, a gesture of unwavering support. He had never been more proud of her. He had seen her strength in his office. But now, he saw her majesty on a global stage. She was not just a strategist, she was a hero. Her destination was her bedroom, a place that felt both alien and intimately familiar. She did not pack the expensive designer clothes, the jewels, or the antique furniture he had given her. She did not take the things that represented his possession of her. She took only her own clothes, a small bag of personal items, and a well-worn laptop. The laptop was her true treasure, the repository of her secret life. It contained 10 years of meticulous research, of market analyses and strategic blueprints she had devised in the quiet isolation of her evenings. She had been a prisoner, but a productive one. The room erupted into a cacophony of questions. They were no longer about her past, but about the crime she had just exposed. They wanted to know about Marcus, about his cronies, about the future of Thorn Holdings. With a small suitcase in hand, she walked out of the house for the last time. The heavy iron gate swung open with a mechanical groan, revealing the world she had been shut out of for so long. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant traffic. It smelled like possibility. She hailed a taxi, gave the driver an address she had not visited in years, and sat in the back, watching the magnificent mansion disappear in the rearview mirror. It was not a home. It was a monument to her past subjugation. Suddenly, a side door burst open, and Marcus himself, flanked by his lawyers and public relations team, strode into the room. His face, usually a mask of control, was a canvas of white-hot rage. He had been watching from his office, and the sight of Clara, so poised and so powerful, had enraged him beyond measure. A single tear slid down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of catharsis, of release. She was no longer Marcus Thorne's wife, no longer a gilded decoration, no longer a useless asset. She was Clara, a woman with a purpose, a mind, and a fire that had been smoldering for 10 years. Now, that fire was about to be unleashed. "This is a lie," he roared, his voice trembling with fury. "This is a fabrication, a desperate attempt by a spurned woman and a small-time CEO to destroy my company. She is a liar and a thief. She has stolen my data." The world outside the mansion gates felt both overwhelming and exhilarating. Clara had traded the suffocating silence of marble hallways for the chaotic symphony of a bustling city. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and street food, was a stark contrast to the sterile, filtered atmosphere she had grown accustomed to. For the first time in a decade, she was a pedestrian, a face in the crowd, utterly anonymous and completely free. She spent the first few days simply walking, observing, and reacquainting herself with a reality she had almost forgotten. The city was a living organism, a network of people with their own struggles and triumphs. And she, once an inert object in a powerful man's collection, was now a small, active part of it. He pointed an accusing finger at Clara, but the reporters, who had just seen the irrefutable evidence she had presented, did not believe him. His theatrics, his fury, only served to highlight the cold, hard facts that Clara had just laid out. His face, once so proud and arrogant, was now a portrait of a man coming undone. Her first priority was finding work. Despite her intellectual prowess and her secret trove of data, her resume was a decade-long blank. She had no formal work experience to speak of, only the carefully constructed facade of a socialite and a full-time wife. She applied for a variety of roles, starting small, deliberately. A woman of her age with no career history, no matter her background, was a risk. The interviews were a predictable mix of polite skepticism and thinly veiled condescension. She was often asked what she'd been doing for the last 10 years, and her honest answer, managing a household and supporting her husband's career, was met with a professional nod that said, irrelevant. "The only thing I ever took from you, Marcus," Clara said, her voice remaining calm and steady amidst his rage, "is my own life, and I will make it into a masterpiece." 1 week turned into 2, and the rejections began to feel like a steady drumbeat of reality. She began to wonder if Marcus's taunt that she would be on the street begging was a prophecy she could not escape. But then, she saw an advertisement for an administrative assistant at a small financial consulting firm. The job description was simple, mundane even, but something about the company's name, Phoenix Strategies, resonated with her. A phoenix, a creature that rises from the ashes. It felt like a sign. The microphones were aimed at her, and her face, not his, was on the front of every camera. In that moment, Clara, the discarded wife, the useless asset, was the most powerful person in the room. She applied and, to her surprise, was granted an interview. The office was not the gleaming tower of Thorne Holdings. It was a modest, modern space on the 10th floor of a well-maintained but unpretentious building. The interview was with a young, energetic human resources manager who, unlike the others, seemed genuinely interested in Clara as a person. She saw through the 10-year gap and focused on Clara's answers, on the intelligence and quiet confidence that shone through. The sound of Marcus Thorne's enraged scream echoed through the ballroom, but it was lost in the maelstrom of clicking cameras and the shouts of reporters. His theatrical outburst, meant to discredit Clara, had the opposite effect. It was the desperate and pathetic rage of a man who had just been checkmated. The composure of Clara and the solid, undeniable evidence she had presented stood in stark, irrefutable contrast to his unraveling. His lawyers, a team of seasoned, high-priced professionals, looked on in horror. Their rehearsed statements and prepared denials rendered useless by their client's complete loss of control. Marcus, the man who had built his reputation on his cold, calculating demeanor, had just publicly self-destructed. A few days later, she received the offer. The salary was a pittance compared to the settlement Marcus had offered. Barely enough to cover the rent on her small, furnished apartment and her basic living expenses. But it was a start. It was a lifeline forged by her own hands, not a gilded handout. She accepted immediately. Julian, ever the strategist, saw his opening. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that was both a show of false camaraderie and a firm physical restraint. "Marcus, please, let's not make a scene. The evidence is all here. The authorities will have their chance to review it." Her first few weeks at Phoenix Strategies were a testament to her quiet competence. She was tasked with the most basic administrative duties: sorting mail, scheduling meetings, transcribing notes. Her colleagues, a mix of ambitious young graduates and seasoned veterans, largely ignored her. To them, she was a placeholder, a temporary fixture until a more qualified candidate came along. They saw a woman in her late 30s with a simple, elegant style and a vague past. They did not see the mind of a strategist. The word authorities was a silent bomb. It froze Marcus in place. His face, once contorted with fury, turned a shade of sickly white. The full weight of the situation, the absolute finality of his defeat, crashed down on him. This was no longer a personal feud or a business rivalry. This was a criminal investigation. His public reputation, the carefully constructed facade of a powerful, respectable man, was in tatters. She never complained. Instead, she took her tasks and executed them with a precision and efficiency that began to stand out. While transcribing meeting notes, she would mentally reorganize them, adding marginalia with insightful questions or potential weaknesses in the discussed strategy. When sorting mail, she would glance at the sender and recipient and make a mental note of their connections, identifying patterns that others missed. She was not just a secretary, she was a quiet, relentless analyst, a sponge soaking up every piece of information that passed her way. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Reporters hounded Marcus and his team as they were escorted from the ballroom. The press conference, meant to be a simple business announcement, had become a defining moment in corporate history, a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. The stock of Thorn Holdings plummeted in a matter of minutes as the news of the scandal hit the market. Marcus's carefully built empire, a house of cards constructed from lies and greed, was collapsing in a spectacular fashion. Her keen eye did not go unnoticed for long. One afternoon, Julian Thorn, the CEO of Phoenix Strategies, was reviewing the notes for a crucial project. He was a man in his late 30s, sharp, driven, with a reputation for a near-instinctive understanding of market dynamics. He had taken his small firm and, through a series of shrewd moves, turned it into a formidable player in the consulting world. He was the antithesis of Marcus, driven by passion, not greed, by a genuine love of the game, not a hunger for mere power. Clara and Julian remained behind, giving a series of more composed, detailed interviews to a handful of respected journalists. Clara spoke not with bitterness, but with a quiet, powerful sense of purpose. She explained her work with the precision of a professional and the conviction of a woman who had fought for her dignity. She told her story not to garner sympathy, but to provide context. The public, who had just been witness to her triumph, embraced her narrative. The desperate ex-wife had become a hero. Her bravery in exposing such a powerful man resonated with a world tired of corporate corruption and the arrogance of the wealthy. Julian read the notes and found himself drawn to a small, handwritten comment in the margin. It questioned a key assumption about a competitor's expansion plan, suggesting an alternative, and far more likely, motive for their recent actions. It was an insight he had not considered, and it was brilliant. He looked at the bottom of the page where the transcriptionist's initials were usually found. C.T. It read, Clara Thorn. He paused, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and absolute. Thorn Holdings' board of directors, desperate to save what little credibility they had left, suspended Marcus and launched an internal investigation. Law enforcement, armed with the undeniable evidence Clara and Julian had provided, initiated a full-scale criminal probe. Marcus was soon arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The man who had once ruled a kingdom of money and power was now facing a very real and very lonely future behind bars. He summoned his HR manager. "Who is C.T.?" he asked, pointing to the initials. For Clara, the victory was profound, but it was not a moment of celebration. She felt no joy in Marcus's downfall, only a quiet sense of closure. She had not done this for revenge, but for herself. She had proven her worth, not to him or to the world, but to herself. She had reclaimed her life, and the emptiness of the past 10 years was finally being filled. "That's Clara Thorn, sir, our new administrative assistant," she replied. Julian, meanwhile, was thrust into the spotlight as the man who had bravely taken on a corporate titan and won. His firm, Phoenix Strategies, was inundated with offers from new clients, all impressed by his integrity and strategic brilliance. He, in turn, deflected all the credit to Clara. In every interview, he emphasized her pivotal role, her unwavering courage, and her strategic genius. He ensured that the world knew her name, not as Marcus's ex-wife, but as the architect of his downfall. Julian's brow furrowed. The new admin, she wrote this. With the legal and public battles won, it was time to focus on the next phase, the rebuilding of Nexus Innovations. The company was now formally acquired by Phoenix Strategies. Julian appointed Clara as the interim CEO, a move that stunned the business world. A woman with no formal executive experience, a woman who had been a full-time wife just a few months prior, was now in charge of a multi-million-dollar corporation. Yes, sir. Her notes are always very detailed. The HR manager had noted it too, but had not yet brought it to Julian's attention. Thinking it was just a quirk of a meticulous employee, Clara approached the new challenge with the same quiet determination she had shown all along. She found a company hollowed out by greed, its morale shattered and its assets stripped bare. She held a town hall meeting with the employees of Nexus, many of whom were terrified and demoralized. Julian fell silent for a moment, his mind already working. He reviewed more of Clara's recent work, requesting a selection of transcribed notes and internal memos. He saw the same pattern, a keen intellect lurking beneath a professional, unassuming exterior. He saw a strategic mind, not a clerical one. He was intrigued. He had a reputation for spotting raw talent where others saw none. This was an opportunity. "I know many of you are concerned about the future," she began, her voice calm and empathetic. "You've been through a lot. Your hard work has been undermined by a lack of integrity at the top. But I want to assure you of one thing. This company will be a symbol of honesty, transparency, and hard work. We will rebuild it, together, on a foundation of trust, and we will make it stronger than it has ever been." The next day, Clara was surprised to find a new assignment on her desk. It was not a transcription or a filing task. It was a confidential project brief, detailing a complex market analysis for a potential new client. The note attached was in Julian's handwriting. C.T. "I'd like your unedited thoughts on this." J.T. She outlined her plan for the company, a new, streamlined management structure, a focus on employee welfare, and a renewed commitment to innovation. She had no need for grand pronouncements or empty promises. She simply spoke the truth, and her honesty was a powerful tonic for the beleaguered employees. They saw her not as a distant executive, but as a leader who understood their struggles and who was committed to their success. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush she had not felt since the days she had secretly been poring over Marcus's business plans. It was a test, and she was ready for it. She spent the next 2 days working on it with a fervor she had not known she still possessed. She went beyond a simple analysis. She used her laptop, the repository of her 10 years of self-taught knowledge, to cross-reference data, analyze market trends, and even create a risk assessment model. She did not just provide a report, she provided a full-fledged strategic proposal. In the following months, Clara worked tirelessly, pouring her heart and soul into the company. She was in her element, a conductor leading an orchestra of brilliant, dedicated people. She implemented the new systems she had envisioned for years, creating a work environment that was both transparent and efficient. She mentored her team, empowering them to take ownership of their work. She was not a boss, she was a leader. She was building a legacy, not for a name or for a family, but for herself. She submitted the report directly to Julian's office. He received it that afternoon and began to read. He was astonished. The depth of the analysis, the clarity of the strategic thinking, and the sophistication of the financial models were a far cry from anything he would have expected from an administrative assistant. He had given her the task as a small test of her aptitude, but she had delivered a masterpiece. He had found a diamond in the rough. Julian watched her from afar, his admiration growing with every passing day. He saw the woman he had first met, the woman with the quiet strength and the unassuming grace blossom into a true corporate leader. He saw the fire that had been smoldering for a decade now burning brightly, illuminating not just the company, but her own life. He had trusted his gut, and his gut had led him to a woman of immense power and profound integrity. The acquisition had been a success, but the discovery of Clara was the true victory. He called her into his office. This was not the cold, sterile study of Marcus. It was a vibrant, bustling space filled with whiteboards and stacks of reports. Julian sat across from her, not behind a desk, and gestured for her to sit in a comfortable armchair. The rebuilding of Nexus Innovations was a monumental task, but Clara was more than ready for it. She moved into a modest office on the 10th floor, the same floor where she had once been an administrative assistant. The company was in disarray, its finances a tangled mess, and its employees demoralized. But Clara, with her characteristic calm and unwavering focus, saw a challenge, not an obstacle. She began by holding town halls, not just to announce her plans, but to listen to the employees. She wanted to know their fears, their frustrations, and their ideas for a better future. Her empathy and sincerity were a balm to the shattered morale of the company. She was not a distant executive, but a leader who walked among them, who knew their struggles firsthand. "Clara," he began, his voice warm and genuine, "this report is extraordinary. Where did you learn all of this?" Clara felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was the moment of truth. She could lie, or she could tell him a version of the truth. She chose the latter. "I have a background in finance, And I've spent the last decade educating myself and staying abreast of the market. Julian's eyes twinkled with a smile. Educating yourself. That's a very humble way of putting it. This is the work of a professional strategist. Clara, you are not an administrative assistant. You are an asset, a very valuable one. One evening, as they were going over a complex restructuring plan, Julian stopped and looked at her. Clara, he said, his voice soft. I've been thinking, you're not just rebuilding this company. You're building something beautiful here. And I'm just honored to be a part of it. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I have a new role for you. I'm promoting you to junior analyst immediately. Your salary will be adjusted. And I want you on my personal team for a new, high-stakes project. We're looking at a major acquisition, and I think your unique perspective will be invaluable. Clara's heart fluttered. His words were a world away from the cold, clinical pronouncements of Marcus. Marcus had only seen her in relation to him. Julian saw her for herself. Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. A lump formed in her throat. This was the first time in 10 years that someone had seen her, truly seen her, and valued her for her mind. She thought of Marcus, of his sneering words. Useless asset. A faint, triumphant smile touched her lips. Thank you, Julian, she replied, a genuine smile on her face. I'm honored to have your trust. You were the only one who saw me for who I was when no one else did. I accept, sir, she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. I saw a person of immense integrity and profound strength, he said, his eyes filled with warmth. I would have been a fool to let you go. He smiled back, a sincere, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Please call me Julian. We're a team. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. They began to spend their weekends together, not as colleagues, but as two people getting to know each other. They went on quiet walks in the park, shared meals at small, unpretentious restaurants, and talked for hours. He never asked her about the details of her life with Marcus. He respected her privacy and her past. He was not interested in her pain, only in her healing. He loved her for who she was, not for her history, not for her strength, and not for what she had done for him. He loved her for her mind, her heart, and her quiet, resilient spirit. He saw her as a whole person, not as a collection of assets or a list of accomplishments. As she walked out of his office, Clara felt a lightness in her step. The long climb was just beginning, but she had reached the first foothold. She had not only survived her fall, but she had found a hand to help her rise. She looked out the window at the city below, a world of endless possibilities. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. For Clara, this was a new, a profound, and a deeply healing experience. Julian was a stark contrast to Marcus. Marcus had been a man of grand gestures, of public displays of wealth and power, but his love had been conditional, a transaction. Julian was a man of small, genuine gestures. He remembered the details of her stories. He brought her her favorite coffee, and he listened to her with his full attention. He was a man of substance, not of show. His love was unconditional, a gift freely given. Julian's office became a nexus of intense activity. He had assembled a small, elite team, a mix of seasoned analysts and bright, young minds, to tackle the new acquisition project. Clara, now a junior analyst, was a quiet but potent presence among them. Her promotion had been met with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some wondered how an administrative assistant had suddenly ascended to the inner circle of Julian Thorne, a man known for his ruthless efficiency and high standards. But Julian's unwavering confidence in her silenced the naysayers. He had seen her true potential, a keen intellect forged in the crucible of a decade of silent observation. One afternoon, as they walked through a garden, Julian stopped and took her hands in his. Clara, he said, his voice earnest and full of emotion. You are the most incredible woman I have ever met. You've been through so much, and yet, you've emerged with more strength and more grace than I could have ever imagined. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. Clara, I'm falling in love with you. The target of their acquisition was a subsidiary of Thorne Holdings, the very corporation that had once been her husband's kingdom. The irony was a sharp, bitter thing, but also a source of immense motivation. She knew Thorne Holdings from the inside out. While Marcus had been busy with his public-facing duties and grand pronouncements, she had quietly learned the company's internal machinations. its alliances, its rivalries, and most importantly, its vulnerabilities. Clara's eyes welled with tears, not of sadness, but of a joy so pure and overwhelming that it took her breath away. For a decade, she had been starved of genuine affection. She had been made to believe that she was unlovable, a failure. Julian's words were a validation of her worth, a testament to her journey. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with a love she had never thought she would feel again. The subsidiary, Nexus Innovations, was a tech company that had once been a shining star in the Thorn portfolio. But in recent years, its performance had plummeted, and it was now a financial drain. Julian saw an opportunity. He believed the company's core technology was sound and that its problems were a result of mismanagement, not a flawed product. His plan was to acquire it, strip out the dead weight, and revive its potential. He had no idea just how deep the rot went. "Julian," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "I love you too." Clara, with her unique knowledge, knew the rot was not just in Nexus Innovations, but at the very top. She knew that Marcus, for all his arrogance, was a man who preferred to delegate the dirty work. He had placed Nexus Innovations under the management of one of his most loyal, yet most incompetent, cronies. She also knew that he had been secretly siphoning funds from the company through a complex web of shell companies, using the firm's declining performance as a cover for his embezzlement. They stood there for a long moment, their hands clasped, their hearts connected. The past was a memory, a chapter closed. The future was unwritten. But for the first time in a decade, Clara was not afraid. She was ready to begin. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, but it had found a partner to build a nest with. Her life had not ended with her marriage. It had truly begun. Julian entrusted Clara with the crucial task of conducting the deep-dive financial audit. He had a hunch that something was not quite right with Nexus's numbers, but he lacked the intimate knowledge of Thorn Holdings' internal ecosystem that Clara possessed. He had given her access to all the necessary files, not knowing she had already built a mental map of the corporate labyrinth. The tranquility of their burgeoning romance was a fragile, precious thing, a garden they cultivated away from the relentless glare of the media and the demands of their professional lives. Clara and Julian found solace in simple moments, a shared laugh over a bad joke, a quiet walk through the park, or a late-night conversation about their hopes and dreams. They were building a foundation of trust and affection, but a shadow still lingered, a remnant of a past that refused to be fully buried. Clara worked tirelessly, her focus absolute. She spent long nights in her small apartment, a stack of spreadsheets and internal memos spread across her coffee table. She cross-referenced every transaction, every expenditure, every obscure line item with the hidden data she had on her laptop. She was a detective, and the crime she was investigating was the systematic plunder of a company by its own leadership. The shadow had a name: Martin, a former associate of Marcus Thorn. Martin was a man who thrived in the murkier corners of the corporate world, a fixer who had helped Marcus arrange many of his fraudulent deals. He had escaped the initial dragnet of the investigation, going to ground as soon as the scandal broke. But a man like Martin, whose entire life was a web of secrets and illicit connections, could not stay hidden forever. He was a predator, and when he saw an opportunity, he would seize it. As the days turned into weeks, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. She uncovered a series of seemingly legitimate contracts that, on closer inspection, led to a network of holding companies with no real assets, all funneled through the same law firm that handled Marcus's personal affairs. She found payments for fictitious consulting services and inflated invoices for non-existent equipment. The pattern was clear. Marcus was systematically stripping the company bare, planning to sell its husk to an unsuspecting buyer. The opportunity came in the form of an anonymous email to Julian Thorn. A simple subject line that read, "I know what she did." The email contained a grainy, indistinct photo of Clara, with a known member of an offshore financial firm, a meeting she had secretly attended years ago while still married to Marcus, in an attempt to understand a complex deal he was orchestrating. The email demanded a significant sum of money, threatening to release a fabricated narrative to the press that Clara had not been a victim, but a co-conspirator in her ex-husband's schemes. It was a vicious, calculated lie, a last-ditch attempt to extort money and tarnish the one person who had single-handedly brought down a corporate titan. During this intense period, Julian began to spend more time with her. He would often stay late, not to supervise, but to work alongside her. He was fascinated by her methodical approach, the way she could spot a single, fraudulent transaction hidden in 1,000 pages of data. He saw her mind at work, a strategic force of nature, and he was captivated. He began to see her not just as an invaluable colleague, but as a person of depth and integrity. Julian's first instinct was fury. He had seen the kind of person Martin was, a snake who would lie and manipulate to get what he wanted. He wanted to contact the authorities, to expose the man for the criminal he was. But then he saw the toll it took on Clara. She was no longer the resolute warrior of the press conference. She was a woman who was tired of fighting. The threat, though baseless, was a reminder of a past she wanted to forget, a life she had spent a decade trying to escape. One evening, he brought her a cup of tea as she hunched over her laptop, the screen illuminating her determined face. "Clara, you've been working nonstop. Take a break. Let's just pay him." "Julian," she said one evening, her voice filled with a weariness that broke his heart. "It's not worth the fight. It's not worth dragging all of this up again." She looked up, a faint smile on her tired face. "Thank you, Julian. This is important. I feel like I'm close to something big." He looked at her, his heart aching for her pain. He saw a flicker of the old Clara, the woman who had lived in the shadow of a powerful man, who had been conditioned to accept that her dignity was a price to be paid for peace. But he also saw the new Clara, the woman who had rebuilt a company, who had stood against an empire and won. He knew he could not let her return to that place of quiet submission. He leaned against the desk. "I can tell. You have a way of seeing things others miss. A kind of sixth sense?" "No, Clara," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We are not going to pay him. We are not going to give him an inch. We are not going to let a liar and a thief dictate our lives. You have fought too hard for this. For us. For your freedom. We are not going back." She hesitated for a moment before replying. "Perhaps it is. Or perhaps I just know the enemy better than most." The words were a half-truth, a veiled reference to a past she was not yet ready to fully reveal. He saw the fear in her eyes, the hesitation that came from a lifetime of being told to be quiet, to not cause a scene. He took her hands in his. "I am here. Clara. We will face this together. This is a battle we will win, not by paying a ransom, but by confronting the shadow and bringing it into the light." Julian's expression grew serious. He had his own team run a background check on Clara when she first joined. He was the CEO of a financial firm, and trusting new employees blindly was a luxury he could not afford. The report had been sparse, a public record of her marriage to Marcus Thorne and her lack of professional history. At the time, he had been curious, but he had dismissed the past and chosen to trust his instinct about her. Now, her words gave him pause. Julian, with his signature strategic genius, developed a plan. He did not go to the police, not yet. He knew that an official investigation would create the very public spectacle Martin wanted. Instead, he used his own network, a far more ethical and sophisticated network than Marcus's had ever been. He hired a private investigator to track Martin, to find the source of his threats, and to gather information on his recent whereabouts and activities. "You knew him?" he asked, his voice low. Meanwhile, Julian and Clara prepared for the counterstrike. They drafted a statement for the press, a preemptive announcement that they had been the targets of an extortion attempt and that they would not be intimidated. They prepared a detailed timeline of Clara's involvement, or lack thereof, in Marcus's fraudulent schemes, backed by the very evidence that had put him behind bars. They were going to be transparent, a quality that Julian knew was a potent weapon against a man who thrived on deceit. "I knew him well," she said, her eyes meeting his. She saw no judgment there, only a deep, empathetic curiosity. She knew she could trust him. "Julian, you said you wanted my unedited thoughts. I have to tell you the truth. Marcus Thorne, the man who runs Thorne Holdings, he is my ex-husband." The investigator found Martin hiding in a quiet, coastal town, living a life of paranoid solitude, constantly looking over his shoulder. The investigator also found evidence that Martin, in a moment of panic, had made a frantic phone call to a former colleague who was also implicated in Marcus's crimes. The call was a desperate plea for help, a sign that Martin was running out of options. A silence fell between them. Julian processed the information, his mind replaying their past conversations, her quiet intensity. her almost personal investment in this project, everything suddenly made sense. He saw her not as a woman seeking revenge, but as a woman seeking justice. He saw the strength it must have taken to leave that world behind and start over from scratch. Julian and Clara had the information they needed. They had the threat, the proof that the threat was a lie, and they had the location of the man who was making the threat. Julian contacted the federal authorities, providing them with the information, not as a victim, but as a concerned citizen who had just uncovered evidence of a potential criminal conspiracy. As she rebuilt the company, Julian was a constant presence by her side. He was not there to micromanage, but to offer support, a strategic sounding board, and a quiet, encouraging voice. Their relationship had evolved far beyond a professional partnership. They would often work late into the night, their conversations moving from business strategy to their personal lives. Julian found himself opening up to her in a way he never had before. He spoke of his own struggles, his dreams for the future, and his admiration for her. He had grown up in a loving but modest family, and his drive had come from a desire to prove himself, not from a sense of entitlement. He saw in Clara a kindred spirit, a person who had fought against all odds to find her own place in the world. The next morning, Martin was arrested. He had been a man of shadows, but he was now in the full, unforgiving light of the law. The threat he had posed was neutralized, not with a payout, but with a strategic takedown. Clara felt a profound sense of relief. It was the last ghost of her old life, finally exorcised. She was free. Clara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "I've been fighting for myself, and now I want to fight for something else." What Marcus did to Nexus Innovations is just a symptom of a much deeper rot. He sees companies and people as disposable assets to be used and discarded. "This isn't just a business deal for me, Julian. It's about bringing a measure of justice to a man who believes he is above it." She looked at Julian, her heart filled with an immense gratitude and a love that went beyond mere romance. He had not just defended her, he had empowered her. He had shown her that she no longer had to live in fear, that she had a partner who would stand by her and fight for her, not as her savior, but as her equal. Julian nodded slowly, his respect for her deepening with every word. He saw the pure, unadulterated strength in her. He had been right to trust her. She was not only brilliant, but she was also a woman of impeccable integrity, a beacon of light in a dark world of corporate greed. Their love, born in the crucible of a corporate battle, had survived its final test. They had faced down a threat, not with money or with force, but with integrity and courage. And in doing so, they had not only protected themselves, but they had also solidified the bonds of a partnership that was destined for a lifetime of shared triumphs. "Then we will fight this battle together, Clara," he said, his voice a firm, steady anchor. "And we will win." He moved closer, not with the predatory energy of a man used to getting what he wanted, but with the quiet tenderness of a man who had found something truly precious. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was a stark contrast to Marcus's cold indifference. It was a touch that saw and acknowledged her. In that moment, Clara felt a warmth she had forgotten was possible. The air between Julian and Clara had a new, undeniable texture, one of profound intimacy and a shared future. With Martin neutralized and the last shadow of Marcus's world finally vanquished, they were free to focus on their own lives, to build something entirely new. Their relationship blossomed into a partnership of equals, founded on a bedrock of respect, honesty, and a love that had been forged in the fire of corporate warfare. With their shared purpose solidified, the project took on a new, more personal meaning. Julian's team was no longer just working on an acquisition, they were on a mission. Clara, now a trusted confidant, revealed more of her secret knowledge, guiding them through the hidden channels and secret alliances of Thorn Holdings. The pieces of the puzzle came together with startling speed, forming a clear, damning picture of Marcus's corruption. They had not just found a company in distress, they had found a crime, and they had the evidence to prove it. They often spoke of their dreams, of the life they wanted to build together. Julian, who had always been a man of vision, spoke of his plans to expand Phoenix Strategies, to create a global firm that valued integrity as much as profit. Clara, in turn, shared her own ambitions for Nexus Innovations, not just as a profitable enterprise, but as a company that could change the industry for the better. She wanted to create a culture where people were valued for their contributions, not for their connections. They were two powerful minds, two resilient souls, now working in perfect harmony, their individual dreams converging into a single, shared purpose. The atmosphere in the Thorne Holdings boardroom was as cold and sterile as a morgue. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of calculated indifference. He was a man who believed in the absolute power of his position, a king in his own court. He had summoned his most trusted advisors and the department heads of Nexus Innovations, the subsidiary that had become a persistent thorn in his side. One crisp autumn evening, Julian took Clara to a quiet, secluded spot overlooking the city skyline. It was the same skyline she had once seen from Marcus's study, a distant, glittering landscape that had seemed so unreachable. Now, it was her world, a testament to her journey. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had never dreamed of a moment like this. Not after the cold, transactional nature of her first marriage. "The deal is in motion," he announced, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Phoenix Strategies has made an offer. It is low, but we will accept it. We need to cut our losses and move on." Julian got down on one knee, his eyes shining with a love that was so pure and so genuine it took her breath away. "Clara," he began, his voice a soft, warm rumble. "When I first met you, I saw a woman who was a ghost of her former self. But beneath that quiet exterior, I saw a fire, a brilliant mind, and a warrior's heart. You are the strongest person I know. You didn't just rebuild a company, you rebuilt your life. You taught me the true meaning of integrity, of courage, and of love. I don't want to go through a single day without you by my side. Clara, will you marry me?" The CFO of Nexus, a man named Derek Stone, who was a known crony of Marcus, nodded in obsequious agreement. "The numbers support the move. Sir, Nexus has been a liability for too long. Selling it off is the most logical strategic decision." Tears streamed down Clara's face, not of sadness, but of an overwhelming, profound happiness. For a decade, she had been told she was a useless asset, a woman with no purpose. Now, she was being asked to be a partner, a lover, a wife, and an equal. This was not a proposal. It was a promise that she was loved for who she was, flaws and all, with a past that did not define her, but had only made her stronger. Marcus's eyes, however, held a flicker of unease. He had a sixth sense for trouble, an intuition that had served him well throughout his career. There was a quiet confidence in Julian Thorne's offer that he did not like. It was too clean, too straightforward. He had done his due diligence. Of course, his security team had run a check on Julian's firm, finding nothing but an impeccable reputation. He had also had them investigate the analysts working on the deal, finding them to be competent but not exceptional. There was a nagging feeling, however, that something, or someone, was missing. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times. Yes. He was right. He slipped a simple, elegant ring onto her finger, a single, brilliant diamond that seemed to capture the light of the city below. It was not a symbol of wealth, but a symbol of their love. A quiet, powerful thing that was as strong and as beautiful as the woman who wore it. Back at Phoenix Strategies, Clara was finalizing the dossier. The unveiling, as Julian had started to call it, was set for a week later. They had decided to present the evidence not just to Thorne Holdings Board, but to the public. Julian had a small but powerful media contact who was willing to break the story. They had to move fast, before Marcus could get a hint of what was coming. Their engagement was announced to the world with a simple, heartfelt statement. The media, which had once feasted on the drama of her life, now celebrated her story of resilience and triumph. The public, which had been captivated by the rise of a woman who refused to be a victim, now rejoiced in her newfound happiness. Clara and Julian were not just two successful business people. They were a symbol of hope, a testament to the fact that it was never too late to find love, to find purpose, and to find oneself. "The network is even more complex than we thought, Julian," Clara said, as she presented a final, detailed chart. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, a visual representation of Marcus's greed and deceit. He wasn't just siphoning funds from Nexus. He was using it as a central hub to launder money from other Thorn Holdings ventures. The decline of Nexus was a deliberate cover, a way to make the losses look like a market failure instead of a criminal act. In the months leading up to their wedding, Clara focused on a final symbolic act of closure. She sold the last of her possessions from the mansion, the few pieces of designer furniture and the expensive artwork that she had never truly felt were hers. The money was not important. The act of letting go was. She donated the proceeds to a charity that supported women's shelters, a final, definitive break from a past that had sought to define her. She was no longer a woman of assets, but a woman of purpose. Julian whistled softly, his admiration for her growing with every passing day. This is a web, not a single thread. And you, Clara, you found the spider at the center of it. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, a celebration of their love, not a spectacle for the public. It was held in the same garden where Julian had first told her he loved her. There were no cameras, no reporters, just their closest friends and family. The person who walked her down the aisle was not a distant relative, but her oldest friend, a woman who had seen her through the darkest of times and who now watched her walk into the brightest of futures. He underestimated me, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, a cold, hard fact. He underestimated my silence. As Clara stood at the altar, she looked at Julian, the man who had seen the real her, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had not only given her a new life, he had given her back her own. She had been cast out, dismissed as useless, but she had risen, and in the process, she had found a love that was not a transaction, but a sanctuary. Her story was not one of revenge, but one of redemption. It was a story of a woman who had been broken, but who had chosen to become whole again. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit, a promise that no matter how dark the past, a new beginning was always possible. The next few days were a blur of frenetic activity. Clara, Julian, and their small team worked around the clock, triple-checking every detail, preparing a comprehensive presentation that was both irrefutable and easy to understand for the public. They understood that in a battle for public opinion, clarity and simplicity were more powerful than convoluted legal jargon. The evidence was damning. They had bank records, shell company registrations, and even emails from Marcus's personal account to his cronies, detailing the fraudulent schemes. Clara's meticulous note-taking from her 10 years in the gilded cage had provided the crucial roadmap. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a new beginning. Clara and Julian built a life together that was a world away from the one she had left behind. Their home was not a cold, gilded monument to wealth, but a warm, vibrant space filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet comfort of a love that was as strong as it was true. They were partners in every sense of the word in life and in business. But as their final preparations neared completion, a storm was brewing. The news of Phoenix Strategies' successful bid for Nexus Innovations leaked to the press, likely from within Thorn Holdings itself. Marcus, now fully on the offensive, wasted no time. He used his immense network of media connections to launch a preemptive strike. Clara, as CEO of Nexus Innovations, transformed the company into an industry leader. She was a CEO unlike any other. She valued transparency, fostered a culture of innovation, and empowered her employees to reach their full potential. She was not driven by the hunger for power or the pursuit of a legacy. She was driven by a deep, abiding belief in integrity and a commitment to doing what was right. The company, once a symbol of corporate greed, became a beacon of ethical business practices. The first article appeared in a major financial paper, a seemingly innocuous piece about the new life for Nexus Innovations under Julian Thorn. But buried within the article was a carefully placed, malicious quote from an anonymous source within Thorn Holdings. The source claimed that the acquisition was driven not by sound business principles, but by a personal vendetta against Marcus Thorn. Julian, meanwhile, continued to grow Phoenix Strategies, but he did so with a newfound sense of purpose. He had always been a brilliant strategist, but now he was a leader with a heart. He saw his work not just as a means to financial success, but as an opportunity to build a better world. He and Clara often collaborated on projects, their combined intellect and shared vision a force to be reckoned with. The man who had seen a ghost of a woman had found his greatest partner, a woman who had taught him that true strength was not about what you had, but about who you were. The subsequent articles were far less subtle. One tabloid ran a front-page story with a picture of Clara at a charity gala from years ago. Its headline screaming, "Broke ex-wife seeks revenge." The narrative was clear. Clara was a bitter, spurned woman who had latched onto a powerful CEO to exact her revenge on a man who had left her. The articles painted her as a gold digger, a failed wife, and a desperate woman whose professional success was nothing more than a front for her personal spite. Their lives were full, but they were not without their quiet moments of reflection. They would often walk through the city, hand in hand, looking at the skyline that held so much of their history. Clara no longer saw it as a symbol of her past subjugation, but as a testament to her journey. She had been cast out, but she had risen. She had been dismissed as useless, but she had proven her worth. She had been alone, but she had found a love that was a sanctuary. Julian's firm was immediately hit with a wave of negative publicity. Investors grew nervous. His board members called, demanding explanations. The pressure was immense, a calculated attack designed to break them before they could even present their case. One afternoon, a letter arrived, a final ghost from the past. It was from Marcus, a short, handwritten note from prison. He had heard about her success, about her marriage, about the life she had built. The note was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a single, bitter line. "You got what you wanted." Clara read the articles with a profound sense of déjà vu. This was Marcus's game. He had always used public perception as a weapon, manipulating stories and twisting facts to his advantage. He had done the same to her, quietly painting her as an aloof, childless wife to his friends and family. Now, he was doing it on a global scale. Clara read the note, a faint, sad smile on her lips. She held the paper for a long moment before walking to the fireplace. She watched as the paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into ash. He was wrong. She had not gotten what she wanted. She had gotten something so much more. She had not sought to destroy him. She had sought to find herself. And in doing so, she had found a happiness that was not a prize to be won, but a gift to be cherished. Her colleagues, who had been on the verge of accepting her, now looked at her with renewed suspicion. Was she really as competent as she seemed, or was she just a pawn in a bitter personal war? The doubts were a heavy burden to bear, but Clara refused to let them crush her. She had faced down far worse than gossip and veiled insults. Their lives, once a story of two separate paths, had merged into one. They had found in each other a love that was not born of convenience or of a shared history, but of a shared struggle and a shared triumph. Clara had been a woman with no children, a woman who had been cast out by her husband. But she had been found by a man who loved her, not for what she could give him, but for who she was. She had not only found a new beginning, but she had found a love that had made her whole. Julian, however, was not immune to the pressure. He saw the doubt in the eyes of his team, the hesitation in the voices of his investors. He knew they were at a critical juncture. The next step was crucial. A wrong move could destroy his firm and everything he had worked for. Her story was not one of revenge, but one of redemption. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit, a promise that no matter how dark the past, a new beginning was always possible. The woman who had been a useless asset had become a person of purpose. The woman who had been cast out had found a home. The woman who had been alone had found a family, not in the traditional sense, but in the truest sense of the word. A family of two souls, united by a love that was as strong and as enduring as the city that had watched their story unfold. He called Clara into his office. She was calm, her face betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. She looked at him with an unwavering gaze, a silent question in her eyes. "What do we do now?"